You can't afford this seat. Get back to where you belong. Richard Holt sneered, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. He stood there in his crisp Navy uniform, arms crossed, chin tilted just enough to make it clear. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a message. It wasn't just what he said. It was how he said it, like a policy, not an accident. The words cut sharper than any insult. In that moment, he wasn't just denying a seat. He was stripping a man of dignity in front of a dozen strangers. And the man he humiliated, he had no idea that in just 10 minutes, that same man would fire him, replace the entire crew, and launch a reform that would shake the entire airline. But before we dive into what happened next, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments below. If you believe every passenger deserves respect, no matter what they look like or what they wear, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. This channel shares real stories of power, justice, and dignity. And if you're tired of watching people get treated like they don't belong, hit that like button too. Now let's step inside the first-class cabin of SkyVista Airlines Flight SV247, right as boarding wraps up on a hot July afternoon at Dallas-Fort Worth Airport. The flight's set for Los Angeles. It's 3 p.m., and the cabin lights are dimmed to a soft glow, casting calm shadows across the leather seats and gleaming overhead bins. But the tension is anything but calm. Marcus Wright, 45 years old, walks down the aisle in a plain navy hoodie and jeans. Nothing flashy, nothing corporate, just a man, quietly making his way to seat 2A. Except Marcus isn't just any man. He's the CEO of SkyVista Airlines, a billionaire. But no one in the cabin knows that. Not yet. He's undercover, here to quietly observe and investigate a wave of online complaints alleging racial discrimination on board his own aircrafts. He isn't here to be noticed, just to see what everyday passengers experience when they don't look the part. But the moment he steps into the first-class cabin, Richard, the lead flight attendant, locks eyes with him. Richard doesn't ask for a name. He doesn't greet him like every other passenger. He just blocks the seat with his body, eyes narrowing like he's spotted a trespasser. "Sir, I think you're looking for Coach," he says coldly. Marcus keeps his voice steady. "Actually, this is my seat." Sarah Coleman, another attendant at the front of the cabin, turns toward them with a smirk. "Check your boarding pass again," she says over the intercom. Loud, sarcastic, public. Her tone draws curious stares from other passengers. Marcus calmly shows his boarding pass. His name is clearly printed on it. The seat assignment is correct. The barcode has already been scanned. But Richard scoffs. "This isn't valid," he snaps. "This looks off. Where'd you get it?" His words linger in the air like smoke. Flight attendant Daniel Kim walks over, snatches the pass from Marcus's hand without permission, and squints at it like it's counterfeit. "You must have found this somewhere," Daniel says with a mocking grin. "Or stole it." It's not just disbelief, it's an accusation. And for Marcus, this isn't new. At 27, he was denied a seat in first class simply because he was wearing jeans and sneakers. The attendant that day looked right past his first-class ticket and told him the front cabin was full. It wasn't. That humiliation never left him. It burned. It drove him. It's part of why he built SkyVista with his own money. To prove there's a place where people like him do belong. But right now, none of that matters. Because here he is again, being judged not for who he is, but for how he looks. From row 3. A passenger named Mia Chen watches with disbelief. She's a travel vlogger, always streaming, quietly. She lifts her phone and starts recording. She posts the clip to X with the caption, "Racism on SkyVista Airlines." Next to her, Ethan Brooks, a software engineer from Austin, pulls out his phone and posts to Reddit. "Passenger in first class being humiliated for being black and wearing a hoodie. No hashtags, no filters, just truth." Carla Mendoza, a junior flight attendant standing by the galley, watches everything unfold. She's visibly uncomfortable. "That's enough," she says, her voice soft but firm. "He showed you his pass." Richard cuts her off. "Carla, stay out of it." But Carla doesn't move. She glances at Marcus, then at the growing number of passengers who now have their phones out or are simply staring, appalled. "This is wrong," she mutters under her breath. The cabin is tense. Marcus's hands are steady, but his voice is tight with restrained fury. "You're making a mistake," he tells Richard. "You'll regret this." Richard steps closer, ignoring him completely. "You're holding up boarding. Either prove you bought this seat or step out." At this point, Marcus calmly takes out a sleek satellite phone from his jacket pocket. No one else in the cabin has ever seen one before, but he uses it like second nature. He dials. "Jada, activate the internal system," he says. On the other end, Jada Harris, his trusted executive assistant, responds instantly. "It's ready. Just say the word." Richard raises an eyebrow but says nothing. He's still clinging to the idea that Marcus is just some guy pretending to belong. Sarah, emboldened by Richard's lead, turns to the passengers. "Sorry for the delay, folks," she says with a dry laugh. "We're trying to sort out a fake boarding pass issue." Daniel, holding Marcus's ticket, places it inside a black crew bag behind the service station and zips it shut. "Don't worry," he says smugly. "We'll verify it, eventually." Ethan, now furious, walks up and tries to peek into the bag. "That's his pass. You're hiding evidence." He doesn't yell. He just says it loud enough to be heard. And as he speaks, he reads aloud from the boarding pass. "Marcus Wright, seat 2A, confirmed." A hush falls across the cabin. Whispers start to ripple. Carla takes a step forward. "You just locked up a verified ticket," she says to Daniel. "That's a violation." Marcus's jaw clenches. "You're not just humiliating me. You're ruining your company." Richard shrugs. "We'll see about that." He turns to address the other passengers. "This man doesn't belong in first class." But the crowd isn't buying it anymore. Mia posts another update. "They just took his boarding pass and locked it away. This is happening in front of all of us." One man in seat 1B leans over. "This is insane," he mutters. But Marcus doesn't flinch. He locks eyes with Richard. "You think I don't belong here?" he says, voice low and even. "You just made the biggest mistake of your career." Then, without raising his voice, he speaks clearly into the satellite phone. "Prepare to initiate crew replacement. Stand by." Carla exhales, a subtle sign of relief. She doesn't know who he is yet, but she knows what she just saw wasn't right. And the people around her? They're starting to agree. Daniel Kim stood in front of the sealed crew bag like a guard at a vault, arms crossed, eyes defiant. "This boarding pass is suspicious," he declared, tilting his head at Marcus with a smirk. "You need to leave. Now." His voice was loud, harsh, like a warning shot meant for everyone in the cabin to hear. Marcus didn't move. He didn't flinch. But the temperature in the first-class cabin had changed. You could feel it. The awkward stares, the hushed murmurs, the way passengers leaned slightly forward in their seats, watching, waiting. Then, without warning, Sarah Coleman stormed over, her jaw tight with annoyance. She grabbed Marcus's arm, digging her nails into the sleeve of his hoodie. "You were told to leave," she barked. "You are not supposed to be here." Marcus pulled his arm back, not aggressively, just enough to show he wasn't accepting this treatment. "You're making a bigger mistake than you realize," he warned. "You're violating protocol." Daniel stepped closer. "We're not playing games. You either walk out now, or we have you removed." Carla Mendoza, standing behind the beverage cart, looked shaken. "You can't just grab him," she said. voice slightly trembling. His pass was valid. I saw it. It had the barcode and seat number. Richard, watching the scene unfold from the front galley, muttered under his breath. He's just here to stir up trouble. He didn't bother hiding the disgust in his tone. It was subtle, but unmistakable. A microaggression wrapped in fake authority. At that moment, Ethan Brooks, still holding his phone, stood up from row 4 and started live streaming. I can't believe this, he said, looking directly into the camera. They're physically trying to remove a black man from first class. His ticket was valid. They locked it away. Now they're accusing him of being a fraud. This is unacceptable. Within seconds, comments began pouring in on Reddit. No filters, no hashtags, just raw footage. A growing audience was now watching the confrontation unfold in real time, and the cabin knew it. Richard shot Ethan a glare. Sir, filming is not permitted during pre-flight, he said sharply. But Ethan didn't stop. Neither is racial profiling, he replied. That struck a nerve. Sarah took a step back, momentarily rattled. Carla stepped forward now, bolder than before. I've been on flights where things like this were swept under the rug, she said, loud enough for passengers to hear. I've reported it before, and it was ignored. Richard's face twisted. Carla, I suggest you remain professional. She held her ground. This is professional. That man showed his pass. You took it. You locked it away. Now you're trying to throw him off the plane. Marcus turned to Carla, calm but direct. Thank you. Then he reached into his jacket again and raised the satellite phone. Jada, he said, voice steady. Escalate the internal system. On the other end, Jada Harris, his assistant back at Sky Vista headquarters, replied immediately. I've logged the incident. The system's ready. Next move is yours. She sounded focused, composed. This wasn't the first time she'd had to help Marcus clean up a mess. But this time, it was happening live. Back in the cabin. Richard walked toward the sealed bag, leaned down, and zipped it slightly to check the contents. Then he zipped it shut again and turned around. You're holding up a full cabin of paying customers, he said. You can't buy a seat just because you found someone else's boarding pass on the ground. The line was intentional, designed to paint Marcus as a scammer, a thief, someone who didn't belong. The crowd stirred. Mia Chen stood up from her seat again. That's enough, she shouted. I posted your first interaction on X. People are already reacting. This is wrong. Several passengers nodded, murmuring their agreement. Ethan added, We saw him with the boarding pass. You took it. You're lying to everyone here. Richard glared. Passengers don't run the cabin. Marcus stepped forward, not aggressively, but with quiet command. Neither do racists. The room froze. You could hear the buzz of the air vents, the clink of a bottle in the galley, the hush of breath being held. Daniel shook his head, trying to hold his ground. We're following airline procedure. Carla laughed dryly. No, you're not. You're improvising your own rules, and we all know why. For a second, it looked like Richard was going to explode. Instead, he turned and whispered something to Sarah, who immediately turned her back to Marcus and began whispering to another crew member across the galley. They were plotting, not thinking, plotting, trying to figure out how to paint Marcus as a threat, a disruptor, a liability. Because if they could do that, they could remove him, frame the story their way, just like Marcus had seen before. He remembered being 18 years old, standing at a crowded airport terminal in Atlanta, wearing hand-me-down clothes, and being mocked by gate agents who thought he'd wandered into the wrong area. They told him he was lost. He wasn't. But that memory had shaped him, hardened him, taught him to stay calm, even when humiliated. Back in the cabin, Richard raised his voice. This man is impersonating a first-class passenger. For the safety and comfort of our guests, he will be removed." A few gasps echoed, but then Carla did something no one expected. She stepped directly between Richard and Marcus. "No, he won't," she said. "I've had enough of watching people like you do this." Richard narrowed his eyes. "You're siding with him?" Carla didn't blink. "I'm siding with the truth." More passengers murmured in agreement. One man in seat 3D stood up and said, "If you put hands on him again, we'll call it in ourselves." Marcus took a deep breath. The cabin was turning. The tide was shifting, for once. It wasn't silence. It was pushback. "You said I didn't belong," Marcus said to Richard, locking eyes. "You're about to find out just how wrong you were." His voice wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. Everyone heard it, in that moment. The first-class cabin of Sky Vista Airlines Flight SV247 had stopped being a luxury space and had become a courtroom. Truth was on trial. And justice? It was coming. If you were in that cabin, would you have spoken up? Would you have stood beside Marcus or stayed silent? Tell us in the comments, because this isn't just a story. It's a mirror. "Get him out of my cabin, now!" Richard's voice cracked like a whip across the rows of first-class leather seats, sharp and public. He wasn't hiding anymore. There was no subtlety left in him, just fury, ego, and the kind of entitlement that had finally boiled over. He stood near the front galley, eyes narrowed, jaw clenched, chest puffed like a man trying to hold on to control that was already slipping through his fingers. Sarah Coleman stormed back up the aisle, face red with frustration, and shoved Marcus's shoulder hard enough that it forced a step back. "He's a fraud," she shouted. "He doesn't belong here." Passengers gasped, several now standing, wide-eyed, as the energy in the cabin turned electric. "We don't need an incident on this flight," Daniel Kim shouted, grabbing the intercom handset with a shaky hand and announcing over the speakers. "Attention passengers, we have a security concern. Please remain seated." But instead of calming the cabin, his words poured fuel on a fire. "Security concern?" A woman in row 2B scoffed. "The only threat here is your behavior." Daniel, eyes darting nervously, hung up the intercom and muttered, "He doesn't fit here. He's not one of us." That phrase, "not one of us," hung in the air like smoke, thick and ugly. Marcus didn't move. He stood there steady, calm in posture but boiling inside. This wasn't new. At 32, flying home from a tech conference in San Francisco, he'd been stopped mid-aisle by a gate agent demanding to see his boarding pass again, because first class looked too full, and, in their words, "We've had fraud before." That humiliation had clung to him for years. But now it was unfolding again, only this time on his airline, in front of cameras, in front of witnesses, and he wasn't going to walk away quietly. Mia Chen, camera still rolling, posted a second clip to Reddit. "They just pushed him. Intercom used to smear him. This is real." The post went up in seconds, and you could almost feel the weight of it land in the room. People shifted. Some glanced at their phones. Others simply stared at the crew like they were watching a car crash in slow motion. "Enough," Marcus finally said, his voice firm and clear, cutting through the chaos like a blade. "You've embarrassed yourselves, not me." Carla Mendoza, who'd been watching from near the lavatory, stepped forward again, her voice steadier now. "He's a VIP, a verified passenger. You're the ones violating protocol." Sarah whipped around. "You don't speak for the cabin." "I speak for what's right." Carla shot back. "And this is wrong." Richard tried to brush past her, but passengers started standing. First one, then another, then four more. A man in seat 1D stepped into the aisle, arms crossed. "You're not laying another hand on him." Sarah froze. "Sir, sit down." "No," the man replied flatly. Not until this stops. Daniel tried to speak, but Mia interrupted from her seat. You're on camera, she said, holding up her phone. Everyone's seeing this. Richard, clearly shaken now, leaned into Sarah's ear and whispered something. No one heard the words, but it was clear they were plotting something. Anything. To regain control. Carla turned to Marcus, voice low but urgent. Do it. Say what you need to say. They don't know who you are. Marcus looked her in the eye. Not yet, he said quietly, but he didn't reveal himself. Not yet. This had to play out the right way. Give me back my boarding pass, Marcus said to Daniel. Now. Daniel's smirk faltered. It's being verified. You locked it in a crew bag. For protocol. You mean for control. Marcus snapped back. The silence that followed was louder than shouting. Ethan Brooks, still live streaming from his seat, said aloud, He showed it. We saw it. They stole it. This is what bias looks like when no one's watching, except now. We are. Richard pointed at him. Turn that off. You wish, Ethan muttered, holding steady, then, out of nowhere. A large twist landed like a thunderclap. Carla stepped between Marcus and the crew, turning to face the cabin. I filed 2 bias reports this year, she said loudly. Both ignored, both dismissed by Richard. He said it was subjective, said it wasn't our place to interfere. Richard's eyes went wide. That's a lie. I documented both cases, she continued. And I wasn't the only one. The company buried them. I still have the emails. Now murmurs turned to words. I knew it, one woman said from the window seat in row 1A. I've seen it before on flights. I heard it from friends, someone else added. They've had complaints for years. The temperature in the cabin dropped 10 degrees. Marcus looked Richard in the eye. Your time's up. You have no authority here, Richard yelled. Don't I? Marcus replied, his voice quiet but deadly. You really think I'm just some guy with a hoodie and a ticket? Richard faltered, but still refused to connect the dots. You don't get to talk to me like that. No, Marcus said, stepping forward slowly. Then let me make this easy for you. I'm the reason you have a job. Or had one. Gasps. Carla's eyes widened. Sarah backed away like she'd just seen a ghost. Daniel, suddenly pale, muttered, Wait, what? But Marcus wasn't done yet. You denied me service. You humiliated me. You tried to remove me. You framed me. And now you're going to answer for it. Not just to me, to everyone here, and everyone watching. The cabin shifted again. Respect returned to the room, not just for who Marcus was, but for the way he carried himself, even when being torn down in front of strangers. Carla turned to Richard. You need to stop now. But Richard didn't. He stepped toward Marcus, trembling with a mix of arrogance and panic. This isn't over. You're right, Marcus said, raising the satellite phone again, because now it's my turn. And with that, he began dialing the final call. Passengers leaned in, watching like it was the final scene in a movie, but it wasn't fiction. This was real. And no one in that cabin would forget what was about to happen. If you'd been in that room, what would you have done? Would you have stood up or stayed silent? Let us know. Because in moments like this, silence is a choice, and power speaks last. Sarah's voice cracked as she raised it again. He's obstructing the cabin! Move him! Her hand shoved at Marcus's arm one more time, this time harder, more desperate, like if she just pushed hard enough, this whole nightmare would somehow go away. But it didn't. It only exploded, the moment her hand touched him. 2 passengers from row 1 stood up, an older black man in a tan blazer and a white woman with silver hair and fire in her eyes. Stop right there, the woman barked, stepping in between Sarah and Marcus like a wall of granite. Touch him again, and I'll sue this airline myself. Carla Mendoza's eyes lit with relief, then purpose. She moved beside Marcus, standing shoulder to shoulder with the passengers, now creating a human barrier in the aisle. "He has every right to be here," Carla said firmly, her voice louder now, clearer. "You're the ones violating policy, not him." A third passenger, a middle-aged Latino man with a Southwest keychain clipped to his belt, stood up behind them. "I work ground crew," he said loudly. "And this? This is discrimination. Period." Richard's mouth opened like he wanted to argue, but nothing came out. Because the cabin wasn't just watching anymore. It was turning, and the tide had flipped. A dozen passengers now stood between Marcus and the crew, forming a human wall, their faces set, their eyes locked on Richard, Sarah, and Daniel. The humiliation that had been aimed at Marcus was now being deflected and multiplied, right back at the ones who had caused it. Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't say a word. His presence alone was louder than anything else in the room. Sarah stumbled back, the first sign of fear flashing in her eyes. "This is a security threat," she insisted, voice cracking again. "These passengers are interfering with crew duties." Carla shook her head slowly. "No. Sarah, you're interfering with your own dignity." That line hit like a punch. Even a few seated passengers gasped. At that exact moment, the satellite phone in Marcus's hand lit up. He lifted it to his ear. "David," he said, "we're at critical escalation. I need full internal authority. I'm replacing the crew." On the other end, David Lawson, Sky Vista's board member, replied without hesitation. "Authorization granted. Do what you have to do. Corporate is watching." Back in the cabin, Richard laughed nervously, trying to recover some shred of control. "You can't fire me," he said, shaking his head. "This isn't some fantasy." But even he didn't believe it anymore. You could see the doubt flickering in his eyes. Ethan Brooks stepped into the aisle beside Mia, phone still filming, live stream still rolling. "We've got hundreds watching now," he said. "And they're not buying your excuses." Mia, with calm fury in her voice, added, "Every second of this is being archived. Even if you try to delete it, it's already out there. People are tagging journalists. You better think twice." Sarah turned to Richard, suddenly pale. "They're going to report this," Richard hissed. "Keep your voice down." But it was too late. The damage wasn't just done, it was evolving. Jada's voice came over the satellite phone next, clear and cool. "Marcus, internal crew override is active. Just give the word." And then, for the first time since boarding, Marcus spoke with full authority, not as a man in a hoodie, but as the man behind the airline's entire future. "Replace the lead flight crew immediately. Richard Holt, Sarah Coleman, Daniel Kim. You're officially relieved of duty. Do not address passengers. Do not touch any of them. And do not say another word." The reaction in the cabin was electric. People clapped. Someone let out a "Yes!" and another shouted, "It's about time!" But Marcus wasn't finished. "Carla Mendoza will serve as interim lead for the remainder of this flight. You'll receive confirmation from HQ in 5 minutes." Carla's face went white, then flushed with stunned pride. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. Sarah opened her mouth again, but this time passengers shouted her down. "Enough! Sit down! Shame on you!" One man near the emergency exit barked, "You think we're all blind? You didn't even ask his name!" The noise was rising, tension mixing with justice in a way that didn't feel chaotic. It felt clarifying, like the moment a fog finally lifts and people see everything clearly. Daniel tried one more time to explain. We thought he was impersonating." "You thought wrong." Marcus cut in sharply. "And you'll answer for it." Suddenly, Sarah's shoulders slumped. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "He told us to watch certain passengers, said some travelers, Didn't look the part. Richard turned to her, furious. Shut up, Sarah! But it was too late. The words were out, and the confession, whether born of guilt or fear, was now real. You gave instructions? Carla asked, eyes wide. To profile people? Richard looked cornered, flustered, undone. That's not what I meant. But that's what you did, Marcus said calmly. And it's going to end today. Jada's voice chimed back in through the phone. New crew en route to the gate. Internal report submitted. Marcus, media inquiries are pouring in. Let them, Marcus said. Then he turned to the passengers and raised his voice, not in anger, but in solidarity. To everyone who stood up, thank you. To those who stayed silent, it's not too late to speak. But to the crew who tried to humiliate me today, you didn't just cross a line, you burned the bridge. And just like that, the crisis shifted into something else entirely. A reckoning. Marcus took one breath, measured, calm, and then stepped into the aisle, no longer blending in, no longer observing. His voice didn't rise, but it filled the cabin like a bell ringing in a quiet church. My name, he said slowly, is Marcus Wright. I am the Chief Executive Officer of Sky Vista Airlines. The silence that followed was immediate and absolute. You could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, the clink of a soda can in the galley, a cough in row 3. Sarah froze mid-step, eyes darting toward Richard, whose face drained of color. Daniel, who had just minutes earlier accused Marcus of theft, backed up like someone had lit a fire beneath his shoes. But Marcus wasn't done. I boarded this flight in a plain hoodie and jeans, he continued, because I was investigating online complaints about discrimination in this very airline. I came here to observe. I didn't plan to say anything. But what you did, how you treated me, how you treated my name, my presence, my skin, forced my hand. Then he turned to Carla. You stood up when others didn't. You spoke out when it would have been easier to stay silent. As of now, you are promoted. You will no longer work under people who tolerate this kind of behavior. Carla blinked, stunned. Sir, No, Marcus said, gently but firmly. You earned this, not today, long before this. The cabin burst into quiet applause. Some passengers stood, some wiped away tears, and a few just nodded, slowly, as if finally exhaling a truth they hadn't been allowed to say aloud. Richard stepped forward, desperate. Mr. Wright, I didn't know. If I had known. Exactly, Marcus snapped, cutting him off. If you had known who I was, you'd have smiled and bowed and offered me champagne, but because you didn't recognize me, you saw a black man in a hoodie, and you saw a problem. He took a step closer. You didn't ask for my name. You didn't scan my boarding pass. You assumed. You judged. You mocked. And when you realized you might be wrong, you tried to cover it up, locked my pass in a crew bag, lied to your passengers, tried to remove me from a seat I paid for, and now you're sorry? Richard opened his mouth again, but the words wouldn't come. Behind him, Sarah slumped into her jump seat, face pale, breathing shallow. I didn't want to, she whispered. Richard told us to monitor certain passengers. He said they were high risk. He said we'd had issues before with... With what? Marcus asked, turning to her. People who don't look like they belong? Sarah nodded slowly. He said, we should be proactive. He said if we see someone suspicious, even if they have a ticket, we should verify. Carla stepped forward. That's not proactive. That's profiling. Daniel, at this point, looked visibly sick. I didn't know you were the CEO, he muttered, eyes on the floor. That's not the point, Marcus said. The point is, who else have you done this to? Who didn't have a camera? Who didn't have passengers standing up for them? How many people left this airline feeling small, unheard, erased? Jada's voice came through the satellite phone once more. Marcus, the internal crew replacement is complete. HQ has locked out Richard, Sarah, and Daniel from active flight systems. HR has been notified. Carla is now lead. Replacement crew arriving at gate in 10. Thank you, Marcus replied. Then, to the entire cabin. The crew who participated in or enabled this behavior is officially removed. They will not continue this flight. And Daniel... Marcus turned, his tone shifting cold. You are permanently banned from future Sky Vista employment. Your conduct today violated both ethical and federal standards. Daniel dropped his gaze, unable to respond. The passengers, still stunned, started whispering, then clapping again. Mia whispered to Ethan, "This is going to be everywhere by tonight." Ethan nodded. "It already is." But Marcus wasn't finished. "There's more," he said, stepping back into the aisle. "This wasn't an isolated event. There have been dozens of complaints over the past 2 years, ignored, dismissed, swept under the rug. That ends now, effective immediately. Sky Vista will undergo a full internal audit of all bias-related complaints. All historical flight incident reports will be reviewed. We will launch a third-party oversight team to track accountability. No more secrecy. No more tolerance for the quiet kind of hate that hides behind policy." Carla looked up, tears quietly gathering in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, "for not staying quiet." Marcus nodded. "I stayed quiet for too long. I built this airline to serve everyone, not just those who look like they belong in a catalog." A hush fell again, a kind of reverence. This wasn't just a reprimand, it was a reckoning. And then, the twist that left the cabin breathless. Sarah stood again, slowly, shaking. "There's something else," she said. "Richard. He told us not to document certain complaints. He said if a passenger looked like they were just trying to make trouble, to mark it as a guest misunderstanding. I didn't want to, but I was scared. I needed the job. And now you've lost it," Marcus said flatly. "Because silence is a choice, and you chose the wrong side." She sat down again, tears on her cheeks. "I'm sorry." Marcus turned to the cabin once more. "Let me be clear. This isn't just about me. This is about every passenger who's ever been looked at like they didn't deserve a seat they paid for. Every traveler who's been asked to verify while others walk past without question. Every person who's felt small just for existing." Then he added, calmly, "This plane won't take off until a new crew is on board, and until every one of you knows, this is not how we fly anymore." The passengers broke into full applause now, clapping not just for Marcus, but for what he stood for. A woman in the back wiped away tears. A man near the front mouthed the words, "Thank you." And Carla? She stood just behind Marcus now, not just as a flight attendant, but as a leader. She had spoken up. She had stood tall. And now, she was being lifted with him. The energy inside the first-class cabin had shifted from outrage to something quieter, more powerful. Resolve. Marcus stood near the galley, no longer a silent observer, but a man setting the course of a company mid-air. His voice remained steady, unwavering, as he spoke into the satellite phone. "Jada, proceed with system-wide implementation. Notify the operations team and communications division. Full reform is going live today." On the other end, Jada's response was crisp. "Copy that. Internal memos being drafted now. We'll push it through the company's comms before wheels up." Just like that, what had started as a personal investigation transformed into company-wide reform. No theatrics, no PR spin, just action. Carla stood near the jump seat, her uniform still slightly wrinkled from the scuffle, her posture tall with purpose. She wasn't just filling in anymore. She was leading. Passengers began to settle, a few still whispering to each other in disbelief as the replacement crew prepped at the gate outside. And then, the words came. Words that changed everything. "Marcus," Jada said cautiously over the phone, "I need to flag something. We pulled archived reports from the last 18 months. There's a pattern." Marcus narrowed his eyes. "What kind of pattern?" "Multiple bias complaints from different flights, different cities. Same internal response code. No action taken, guest misunderstanding, same phrasing, same flag, and, this is where it gets serious, same override authorization, all linked to one regional operations manager." Marcus paused, the pieces snapping into place. "Name?" Jada didn't hesitate. "James Petrov. He oversees flight operations for the entire Southern Division. All complaints filtered through his office were either downgraded or dismissed, including yours." That hit like a brick. Marcus had suspected there were systemic issues. But this was confirmation that discrimination wasn't just tolerated at the front line. It was quietly being sanctioned from within. "Get me his file. I want every communication he sent in the last year. Escalate it to David. I want him looped in now." "Already sent," Jada said. "And Marcus, I think we're looking at a cover-up." A silence stretched between them. Not the kind born of uncertainty, but of calculation. Marcus turned back toward the cabin. Some passengers were watching him closely, sensing the shift, sensing that something deeper had just been uncovered. He stepped forward. "To everyone here, thank you for your patience. There's something you need to know." The murmurs quieted. Phones lifted again. "The behavior you witnessed today wasn't a one-time mistake. It wasn't just poor training or personal bias. It was part of a larger pattern, quietly supported by management within this company. Complaints were intentionally buried. Responses were falsified. The people responsible are being investigated as of now." Richard, still seated near the rear jump seat in silence, looked up, eyes wide. He hadn't known that part. Not even he had realized how far this ran. "The person who approved those denials," Marcus continued, "he answers to me, and by the end of today, he'll no longer be employed by Sky Vista Airlines." A light wave of applause followed. Not loud, but steady, respectful, earned. Carla turned toward Marcus, a flicker of disbelief on her face. "You're actually cleaning house," she whispered. "Not just talking about it." "I didn't build this airline to carry people," he said. "I built it to carry trust, and we lost it. Now we fix it." At that moment, the replacement crew entered the cabin quietly. A new lead flight attendant, wide-eyed but composed, approached Marcus. "We're briefed, sir. We'll follow your lead." "You'll follow hers," Marcus said, pointing to Carla. "She's acting lead for the remainder of this flight." The attendant nodded, instantly deferring to Carla. The promotion was no longer symbolic. It was functional. Carla glanced around, then gave her first order as lead. "Begin passenger refreshment service. First round's complimentary, courtesy of Sky Vista." That drew a small laugh from a few passengers, breaking the tension just enough. The storm had passed, but the skies weren't clear yet. David Lawson's voice chimed in on the satellite line. "Marcus, I've seen the files. It's worse than we thought. Internal review confirms Petrov downgraded over 70% of passenger complaints flagged for racial bias. His internal memos suggest it was part of an informal culture. Keep flights moving, avoid headlines, brush off noise." "That noise," Marcus said, "was people's dignity being trampled." "Exactly," David replied. "We'll need a full board vote to terminate Petrov's executive contract, but I doubt there will be any objections." Marcus turned his gaze toward the window, watching a baggage cart roll across the tarmac. "No delays," he said. "Finish it today. It's already in motion. when Marcus faced the cabin again. He looked not just like a CEO, but like a man reclaiming the soul of his company. "Sky Vista will change," he said. "Not tomorrow, not next quarter, today." No one applauded this time. No one needed to. Because in that silence was something more powerful than clapping. Belief. The passengers believed him. Carla believed him. And maybe, just maybe, the industry would finally start believing that this kind of leadership wasn't rare. It was necessary. 3 months later, Sky Vista Airlines looked nothing like it had on that hot July afternoon. The company's leadership board had been reshaped. A new code of conduct rolled out across all departments. And Carla Mendoza, once a junior flight attendant with a voice shaking in frustration, now walked through terminals as the company's newly appointed director of cabin culture and passenger equity. But the story didn't fade into just another internal memo. It lived on, in training videos, in national news interviews, and in the memories of every passenger on Flight SV-247. That flight didn't just get delayed, it changed everything. Marcus Wright had made sure of it. In the weeks that followed the in-cabin incident, the media picked up the footage from Mia and Ethan's live streams. Not because it was scandalous, but because it was different. The CEO didn't release a statement. He stood in the cabin. He didn't apologize from a distance. He faced the crew and acted in real time. There was no hiding, no deflecting, no shifting blame. And that kind of leadership, quiet, unshakable, intentional, sparked something. Airlines across the country reviewed their own complaint logs. Some discovered similar patterns. A few tried to quietly correct course, but none could replicate the power of that moment. A black man in a hoodie, standing alone in a luxury cabin and refusing to let anyone push him out of his own company's culture, in the final stages of reform. Marcus also introduced something unexpected. A passenger advisory council made up of real flyers from across demographics. Young, old, wealthy, working class, immigrant, disabled. He invited those who had filed past complaints to help design training materials. Carla led monthly workshops for crew leads. And, perhaps most poignantly, Marcus never changed his travel wardrobe. Hoodie, jeans, always. So they'll never forget what leadership actually looks like, he told Jada one morning as they boarded a flight together in Los Angeles. But for all the progress, the final twist came not from the company, but from a former employee. Weeks after the incident, a letter arrived at Marcus's office, handwritten, no return address. Inside was a single-page confession. It was from a former cabin crew member, not on Marcus's flight, but someone who had worked under Richard Holt for over a year. In the letter, they admitted that Richard had once gathered his team and quietly explained what he called Sky Vista discretion. The phrase, according to the writer, meant quietly monitoring passengers who didn't look affluent enough for first class. It was never written down, the letter read, but it was said often. If someone looked out of place, Richard said we should slow walk them, question their pass, ask them to step aside. He called it protecting the experience. I called it racism. I wish I had spoken up then. That confession sealed it. Marcus had already launched reforms, but now he had proof that the discrimination wasn't accidental. It was a whispered system, a culture of quiet exclusion. And that letter? He framed it. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what silence costs. That could have been any passenger. Marcus told the Sky Vista board during a company-wide address. That could have been someone's mother, brother, child. It was me. But it won't be again. He paused then, looking out over the auditorium full of staff, new hires, former skeptics, longtime allies. Because change doesn't come from policy. It comes from courage. The room stood to applaud, not out of politeness, but because they knew. They knew something had truly shifted. As the epilogue of Flight SV-247 settled into company lore, Marcus launched a new initiative, Right Flight, a scholarship and mentorship program aimed at training and advancing young aviation professionals of color. Not just pilots, but crew, engineers, corporate staff, and designers. Representation at 3,000 feet, he called it, and slowly, but surely, the skies began to look different. So did the terminals, so did the culture, and for every person who had once been told they didn't belong. There was now a story that proved otherwise. If you've ever felt judged, dismissed, or excluded just because of how you look, this story is yours too. And if you ever find yourself in a moment where doing nothing feels safer, remember this: silence protects comfort, but courage creates change. Marcus Wright didn't raise his voice. He raised the stakes, and in doing so, he reminded the world that respect isn't a perk. It's the bare minimum.